It started on a night the sky refused to sleep. The storm outside was wild, thunder tearing through the silence of a quiet neighborhood. Inside one small suburban home, fear was louder than the thunder. A boy's trembling voice broke through the dark. "Dad, please stop. You're hurting Mom." The man's hands gripped the wheelchair handles with cold determination. Rain flashed against the window, painting streaks of silver across his face. "She's nothing but a burden now, son. You'll understand one day," he muttered. The woman in the chair, Grace, met her son's eyes. Her tears reflected both pain and apology. The boy clung to her hand, shaking, whispering her name as if his voice could save her. The thunder rolled again. Everything froze. He thought getting rid of her would bring him peace, but he never imagined his own son would become the hero who stopped him. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Grace had once been the kind of woman whose laughter filled every room, whose kindness seemed to disarm even the coldest souls. She taught at a small community school, loved reading to children, and believed that goodness always found its way back. Daniel, her husband, had fallen in love with that light. Back then, he was hard-working, ambitious, a man everyone in the neighborhood admired. They lived in a quiet African-American suburb, a place where neighbors greeted each other by name, and church bells marked the rhythm of each Sunday. Life was simple, beautiful even, until one night changed everything. It happened after a late community event. The road was slick, the street lights dim. Daniel was driving, humming softly while Grace talked about the students she wanted to help next term. Then came the flash of headlights, the screech of tires, the deafening crash. When Daniel opened his eyes in the hospital, his arm was in a sling. Grace, however, would never walk again. The doctor's words fell like broken glass: spinal cord injury, permanent paralysis. Her world, once full of color, turned into long days of struggle. Daniel tried at first. He told her it would be okay. He smiled, brought her flowers, and promised that love was stronger than loss. But love tested by tragedy doesn't always survive untouched. Months passed. The medical bills piled high. Daniel's construction business started to collapse. Clients withdrew, expenses grew, and whispers spread among friends that maybe Daniel was cursed, that his wife's condition was draining him. Grace, gentle and patient, never complained. She tried to stay hopeful, teaching herself to paint from her wheelchair, finding joy in Eli, their 12-year-old son. Eli adored his mother. Every morning, before school, he would help her into the garden behind their house. He would push her chair along the narrow path lined with hibiscus and marigold. They'd talk about everything: his homework, his dreams, his fears. Grace often said, "The world breaks us, Eli, but it also teaches us how to love deeper." Those words stayed with him. But Daniel's heart was no longer listening. His eyes began to wander toward escape, away from the weight of responsibility, away from the eyes of pity that followed him everywhere. At work, Daniel found sympathy in the wrong place. His new secretary, Liana, noticed the exhaustion in his eyes. Her words dripped with understanding. "You've sacrificed enough," she said one evening. "Maybe it's time to think about yourself." It started with conversation, then turned into something darker, an affair born out of resentment and guilt. When Grace noticed the changes, the late nights, the silence at dinner, she didn't argue. She prayed. Yet her silence only made Daniel angrier. He began to see her not as the woman who once made him feel alive, but as the reason he felt trapped. Eli sensed it too. The tension in the house thickened like fog. Daniel no longer smiled at the breakfast table. He barely spoke to Grace. He skipped church, ignored neighbors, avoided family. The man who had once been a symbol of strength now walked with bitterness in his step. Grace tried to hold the family together, even from her chair, but the distance grew until love became memory. One rainy night, Daniel's decision took shape. He walked into the living room, stood behind Grace's chair, and said softly, "I found a place for you. A care center outside town. They can help you better than I can." Grace looked up. His voice was flat, but his eyes refused to meet hers. She felt something in her chest tighten. She nodded slowly, forcing a smile. "If that's what you think is best," she whispered. But Eli knew something was wrong. He overheard a conversation Daniel had on the phone the next day. His father's voice was low but cold. "Meet me by the old river road tonight. It'll be done before anyone knows." Eli froze behind the hallway wall. Heart pounding. He didn't understand everything, but he understood enough. Fear clawed at his chest. His father was planning something terrible. That evening, the rain returned, steady and relentless. Daniel loaded Grace into the car, pretending everything was normal. "We'll get you settled in tonight," he said. Grace watched him closely. His tone felt final, detached. Eli, pretending to sleep upstairs, waited until the car engine started. Then he slipped quietly through the back door and opened the trunk. The space was cramped, but he curled himself inside, clutching his small flashlight and whispering, "Please God, don't let him hurt her." The drive was long. Rain drummed against the roof. Through the thin metal of the trunk, Eli heard his mother's voice, calm, hopeful. "Thank you for doing this, Daniel. Maybe being there will give us both some peace." He heard his father's sigh. "Yeah, peace." The word carried a chill. The car slowed. The sound of rushing water filled the night. The air grew colder. Eli peeked through a small gap in the trunk and saw faint reflections. The old wooden bridge near the riverbank, abandoned for years. His father stepped out, opened the passenger door, and began to push Grace's wheelchair toward the edge of the muddy path. "Daniel," Grace said softly, her voice trembling. "Where are we?" He didn't answer. "Daniel, please, this isn't the care center, is it?" He stopped. The rain fell harder. The headlights cast their glow on the moving water below. He turned to her, his face twisted between pain and fury. "I can't live like this anymore," he said. "You deserve better, and so do I." Grace's breath caught. "You think peace comes from running away?" He gripped the chair handles tighter. The wheels slid in the mud. "Please don't do this," she whispered, tears mixing with rain. But his hands didn't stop. Eli's heart pounded so loudly he thought it would give him away. He couldn't wait any longer. He kicked open the trunk, jumped out and screamed, "Dad! Stop!" Daniel froze, spinning around in disbelief. The boy ran through the mud, his sneakers slipping, his small frame trembling but unyielding. He threw himself between the wheelchair and the riverbank. "Eli, get back in the car." Daniel barked. "No," the boy cried. "If she goes, I go too." For a long, eternal moment, no one moved. Only rain, thunder, and the sound of rushing water. The rain poured like heaven was weeping. For a moment, Daniel's grip on the wheelchair loosened. His breath came hard and shallow. Lightning flashed across the sky, lighting the faces of a family torn apart by silence and fear. Grace looked at her husband, really looked at him, and saw not a monster, but a broken man drowning in regret. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice soft yet firm. "You don't have to do this. You're not lost yet." But shame is a voice louder than love. He stepped back, shaking his head. "You don't understand," he said, eyes glistening. "Everywhere I look, I see what I've lost. I can't fix this. I can't fix us." Eli clung to the wheelchair. "Then fix yourself, Dad. Please. Don't make me hate you." Those words pierced through Daniel's anger like glass shattering in the dark. He stared at his son, so small, so brave, and suddenly saw his reflection in the boy's defiance. The same eyes that once looked up to him with pride now burned with fear. Daniel's hand trembled. He stumbled backward, collapsing into the mud, sobbing for the first time in years. Grace reached out her hand. Her fingers shook as they brushed his sleeve. "Then come home," she said softly. "Let's heal together, not apart." For a second, something inside Daniel broke open. But before he could speak, headlights appeared through the rain. A second car pulling up behind them. A familiar voice called out, "Daniel, what's going on here?" It was Liana. She had followed him, curiosity turning into dread as she saw the scene. Grace in the chair, the boy crying, Daniel kneeling in the dirt. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "You said you just needed space." Daniel's head snapped up. His face hardened again, pride clawing its way back. "You shouldn't be here," he barked. Eli's eyes widened. She knew. Grace's gaze shifted between them. And in that instant, truth spilled out without a word spoken. Liana's trembling voice broke the silence. You promised it would be over. You said. Enough, Daniel shouted. But it was too late. The damage was done. Grace closed her eyes. Not from anger, but from understanding. So that's what this was, she said quietly. You weren't just trying to let go of pain. You were trying to erase guilt. The air grew heavier. Liana turned, guilt written all over her face. I didn't know it would go this far, she whispered, stepping back toward her car. Daniel's body shook. He couldn't look at his wife or his son. The man who once carried dreams now stood stripped bare under the storm. No mask, no excuses. Just a man who'd lost his way. Eli stepped forward and took his mother's hand again. Mom, let's go home, he said softly. Grace nodded. Her eyes never left Daniel's. Will you drive us? She asked. He hesitated. The question wasn't a demand. It was grace offered to a man who no longer deserved it. Slowly, Daniel rose to his feet, covered in mud, his breath unsteady. He walked to the car, opened the door, and together they left that cursed bridge behind. The drive home was silent except for the hum of the tires and the echo of guilt in Daniel's chest. He glanced at Grace in the rearview mirror, pale, quiet, but alive. Eli's small hand rested on hers. It was that touch that held the family together when words could not. When they reached home, Daniel helped Grace into the house without a word. Then he disappeared into the garage and stayed there all night. The next morning, neighbors saw him sitting on the porch, his face hollow. For the first time he didn't go to work. He didn't answer calls. He just sat and watched the sunrise bleed through the mist. Days passed. Grace's body healed slowly from the cold. But her heart felt even heavier. She prayed often. For Daniel, for Eli, for peace. Daniel began to change quietly. He stopped seeing Liana. He sold his expensive truck, took a job closer to home, and started fixing things around the house. The leaky sink, the broken gate, even the old swing Eli used to love. One afternoon, Eli found his father in the garden, repairing the wooden ramp beside the porch. You're doing it wrong, the boy said shyly. Daniel looked up and half smiled. Then help me do it right. That day marked the beginning of their rebuilding. No grand gestures. Just small, quiet acts of redemption. Daniel began to sit beside Grace every evening, sometimes in silence, sometimes reading scripture. He still carried the weight of what he'd done, but Grace never mentioned that night again. Forgiveness, she believed, was shown, not spoken. The neighbors who once whispered about them now watched with quiet respect. They saw a man once hardened by pride soften under the light of humility. They saw a woman who could have left, but chose compassion instead. Months later, Eli came home with an envelope in his backpack. A school essay titled "The Night My Father Changed." Grace read it first. Her eyes blurred with tears. In it, Eli wrote, I used to think heroes wore capes. But that night, I realized heroes cry too. My dad cried, and in that moment he became human again. She placed the paper on Daniel's lap when he came home. He read it in silence, his jaw trembling. Then he reached for Grace's hand and said, I don't deserve this family. Grace smiled faintly. None of us deserve grace. That's why it's called grace. Those words became the beginning of healing that no doctor could prescribe. Daniel started volunteering at the same rehabilitation center he once considered sending Grace to. He spent weekends fixing wheelchairs, building ramps, and talking with men who had lost everything. Each story reminded him how close he had come to becoming a ghost in his own family's life. Through that work, he found forgiveness, not just from his wife or his son, but from himself. Years later, on a sunny afternoon, Grace rolled her chair out to the garden where Daniel and Eli were setting up a small table for her paintings. Her hands still shook, but her spirit had grown strong again. Daniel looked older now, softer eyes, steadier voice. Eli was taller, nearly a man. Together, they had built a small art shop behind their house where Grace sold her paintings to raise money for people living with disabilities. As customers came and went, Daniel would often tell their story, not as a confession, but as a testimony. Don't ever think you're too far gone, he'd say. Darkness isn't the end, it's where God starts his work. Grace would smile quietly and add, love doesn't erase pain, it transforms it. That family, once broken by despair, had become a beacon of redemption in their small community. And that's when you realize, sometimes, the person you think is lost is only waiting to be found again. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments. What would you have done if you were in Grace's place? Would you forgive or walk away? And if you believe in second chances, subscribe, like, and share this video with someone who needs hope today. Because sometimes, saving someone doesn't mean pulling them from the water. It means reminding them they were never meant to drown.